Introduction to the Military Research System of Xueba. In 2023, Chang Haonan, a military worker, was reborn and returned to his college years in 1996. In the darkest moments before the takeoff of China's military industry, he obtained a research guidance system comparable to the strongest mentor. Starting from improving a fighter jet, we embarked on a completely different research path from our past lives: aircraft engines, phased array radar, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, advanced semiconductors. These are just the beginning. The desert becomes an oasis, the natural moat becomes a passage, the moon is seen in the upper 9 days, and turtles are caught in the lower 5 oceans. These are also not the end points. System. Some people say that teaching people to fish is not as good as teaching them to fish. I am different. Chang Haonan. System. I can provide everything. Chapter 1. Rebirth 1996, Design 1 Fighter. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In a classroom at Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, Chang Haonan was sitting on a chair, looking at a pile of airplane designs spread out in front of him in a daze, as well as the person dressed in a vintage style and looking at his 2 male and 1 female students with a concerned expression. I'm testing the JF.22 ultra-high-speed wind tunnel that's about to be put into use at Base 29, isn't it? Chang Haonan thought to himself, where is this? The surrounding walls are slightly dilapidated, with the lowest part about 1 meter above the ground painted green, especially in areas that are often exposed to the sun, where some wall coverings have been raised. The 2 huge ceiling fans above were buzzing around, and there was no trace of air conditioning. The blackboard next to it turned out to be the same black cement board, instead of the common green board made of epoxy resin and polymer alloy. Due to long-term use and wear, it has become somewhat white, and even sitting in Chang Haonan's current position, it is difficult to see the content written on the edge. He is very certain that there is no such place in Base 29. Chang Haonan's gaze quickly focused on the wooden lecture table in front of the blackboard, with a school emblem hanging in front of the table, which was a pattern he was familiar with. Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, my alma mater. He raised his hand and pinched his right face, then confirmed that it was not a dream. Haonan, Haonan. One of the chubby boys with a curly head leaned over and gently patted Chang Haonan's shoulder. Are you okay? Why did your face suddenly turn pale like something, and you've been in a daze for 5 or 6 minutes since just now? If you find it too difficult, just say it out, my brothers won't laugh at you. Chang Haonan turned his head to look at the other person, and it took a few seconds to find this face from his distant memories. Old Wu. Chang Haonan asked tentatively, why are you? The person who just spoke was his roommate when he was in college, named Wu Yifan. The two had different aspirations but had a good relationship. After graduation, the latter ventured into the business world and gained a considerable fortune. Just what appeared in front of Chang Hao's south was the image of Wu Yifan when he was young. At that time, his hair was still very thick, and there was no scar on the corners of his eyes that was later cut off due to retaliation from his competitors. Hey, Haonan, even if it's really difficult, there's no need to pretend not to know Lao Wu. Even if we can't design a supersonic fighter jet, it's still okay to design a glider. It's not embarrassing. Another tall and thin boy smiled helplessly, and I think you should take a break. You've been staying up late these days, haven't you? This sentence finally fully awakened Chang Haonan's memory of the scene before him. Don't worry, I'm fine. He took a deep breath and then lowered his head again to look at the blueprint on the table in front of him. It was a design of a J.7, or more precisely a replica of the MiG.21 prototype of the J.7. This happened in the second semester of his junior year, which was the first half of 1996. Due to the dispute between China and the United States at the beginning of the year, he was greatly stimulated. Therefore, he decided to design an improved fighter jet based on the J.7 prototype in this aircraft design course, which took up a full 10 credits. The 3 people in front of him are classmates in the same course group. Apart from Wu Yifan, who is not interested in his major but aspires to pursue a career in business. The tall and thin man named Zhou Shuwan is the other thigh of our group besides himself. His father is a senior researcher at 601 Institute, and only a few people know about this matter. After graduating, Zhou Shuwan also entered 601 Institute and later served as a designer for a certain type of carrier-based aircraft subsystem. As for the girl who hasn't spoken yet, her name is Zhang Man. She is a petite, sweet and lovely beauty with average or above academic performance. As Zhou Shuwan had always liked her, he decided to let her join the group. However, Zhang Man had no emotional attachment to Zhou Shuwan, just holding on to his thigh. He scored high in all experimental courses and group assignments, but Chang Haonan was not familiar with her and had no contact with her after graduation. For Chang Haonan's idea of designing a supersonic fighter jet, the three naturally felt that it was completely impossible. However, they did not directly oppose it, but only found the design diagram of the J.7 prototype MiG.21, indicating that since improvements are needed, at least the design prototype should be fully understood. If Chang Haonan can calculate the aerodynamic performance of the MiG-21, they agree to accompany him on the adventure. If not, they will design a glider with a high aspect ratio according to Zhou Shuwan's idea. Is it just the result? After all, people have limits, and for Chang Haonan, who was originally only relatively hardworking in terms of timeline talent, this matter is indeed beyond his ability range. In the end, we had to follow the agreement and design a glider together with the other three people. Although we got a decent score in this course, it has always been a regret for Chang Haonan. And the current situation, he should be returning to his college years almost 30 years ago, and it happens to be at this critical moment. Calculating the performance of MiG-21 is not a problem for the current Chang Haonan. Because in addition to work experience from later generations, at the moment when Chang Haonan saw the full picture of the design drawings, a research guidance system suddenly appeared in his mind after he proposes a reasonable and closed-loop project concept. The system can spend a certain amount of research points to determine what to do and how to do each step next, and give him corresponding abilities. Simply put, this system is equivalent to a mentor who is responsive and includes both teaching and learning. At the moment of seeing this system, Chang Haonan almost fainted with excitement. After all, every graduate student would hope to have such a mentor. Of course, if 10 times the research points are consumed, the system can also directly provide correct or optimal results, but as someone who has truly led a project, Chang Haonan is very clear that this is by no means the most efficient usage. Translating the results from one's mind into reality also requires time and energy. Even if he doesn't sleep or rest, he can't output much specific scientific research results. Moreover, the system's research points probably don't support such extravagance. More importantly, he is not the only researcher in China. If with the help of a super mentor like the system, the efficiency of the entire Huaxia scientific research system can be driven by solving key problems or providing methodologies, then the explosive power will be thousands of times greater than being alone. However, it is still too far to talk about these things in Chang Haonan's current state, so he decided to first salvage his past regrets. Research points. 10 theoretical level. LV2, 0/10,000, engineering experience. LV1, 0/1000, management ability. LV0, 0/100, comprehensive ability. LV1 project in progress. 0 projects that can be carried out. 1. A bold idea appeared in Chang Haonan's mind. Although he himself knows it's not very reliable. But since he has the system, he will eventually have to give it a try. Design a J.20 for me. Don't worry about whether Huaxia could produce the J.20 in 1996, just say whether it's handsome or not. Stealth, duck wings, dual-engine heavy warfare, DSI inlet, active phased array radar. You should know that even YF-22 has not completed the test flight yet. However, soon after Chang Haonan's YY started, a basin of cold water was poured on him. Insufficient ability level, no available ideas for this project. Obviously, his idea about the J.20 is at most just an idea and does not meet the reasonable and closed-loop project concept required by the system. It's reasonable to think about it, just like a recent graduate student asking his supervisor to design a fifth-generation fighter jet, obviously lacking in both ability and experience. We still need to rely on our existing equipment to modify the MiG.21. Chang Haonan had to refocus his attention on the MiG.21 design in front of him. The system currently only has 10 research points, so it must not be used indiscriminately. There are indeed many deeply improved versions of the MiG-21 in later generations, but some of these designs require a lot of computational simulation work. Chang Haonan also does not know which solution can be implemented based on the research conditions in 1996 and his current abilities. So the ideas of Zhou Shuwan and 3 others are actually correct. Let's first understand the MiG-21 and also check the hardware level of Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics in the mid-1990s. Using CATIA to model the MiG-21, and then using the finite volume method to simulate the aerodynamic characteristics of the aircraft, Chang Haonan muttered in his heart. Improve project consumption technology points. 1 point, directly provide project results consumption points. 10 points. Are you sure to carry out the MiG-21 modeling and simulation project? Chang Haonan took a deep breath and suddenly clenched his fists at Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. It's done. Confirm. Improve the project. A large amount of information quickly flooded into his mind, although he still doesn't know the outcome of this problem, at least he already knows what to do next and how to do it. I see, I completely understand. JPG. After about half a minute of silence, Chang Haonan spoke again. I've come up with a solution. Trust me, even if it's a fighter jet, we can design it. Haonan, do you really have ideas? Zhang Man placed an enamel cup filled with hot water on the table south of Chang Hao and asked with a slightly skeptical tone. On the side of the enamel cup is a military emblem of the Air Force, as well as the instructor's inscription. Establish a strong People's Air Force, defend the motherland, and prepare to defeat the invaders. This was obtained by Chang Haonan through his father's special request, and he has been carrying it with him ever since, using it for many years. As someone whose main goal is just to get a high score, Zhang Man naturally felt that the idea of designing a fighter jet was a fantasy from the beginning, but after all, Chang Haonan's grades were also among the top, and the latter's efforts were indispensable in course design work. She also did not want to directly oppose making the relationship too rigid. That's why I came up with the idea of having Chang Haonan analyze the aerodynamic characteristics of the MiG-21, hoping to make the other party understand the difficulties and retreat. There is no exam for this course, and the course design assignment will directly affect their final grades. She doesn't want to go crazy with them. Thank you. Chang Hao picked up his cup and drank all the water inside. He then grabbed the design of the MiG-21 and stacked it, putting it in a nearby bag. Let's go to the computer room. Chapter 2. Computational Fluid Dynamics Simulation. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In 1996, it was an era when people had to wear shoe covers when entering computer rooms. Computers were a novelty, and students' personal computers were almost non-existent. Even school computer rooms, unless approved by the college or higher authorities, could only be used for up to 1 hour a day with their student ID cards. At this moment, Chang Haonan was sitting in front of a computer of an unknown brand, looking at the familiar yet unfamiliar screen on the monitor. The classic fluid dynamics calculation software Fluent is a relatively new version compared to 1996. The oldest Fluent is just a partial differential equation solver, and it doesn't even have grid partitioning capabilities, which would increase the workload by several times. Although Chang Haonan has a system buff that allows him to perform smooth and efficient operations, the computer itself in 1996 was unable to do so, and what he currently lacks the most is time. However, even so, the 3D modeling process still requires additional software to complete, such as CATIA from Dassault. This is really Yi Qing's return, in a dual sense. Chang Haonan looked at the CRT monitor, trackball mouse, and Win95 interface in front of him and thought to himself. Haonan, when did you learn these things? Wu Yifan, standing behind Chang Haonan, had a curious look in his eyes. What he is concerned about is not the simulation modeling work that Chang Haonan is currently working on, but the latter's extremely proficient use of computers. He knows a big shot from Renmin University of China, who earned over 200,000 yuan through computer programming in his sophomore year and once became his idol. Of course it's when you go off campus to contact business, Chang Haonan said without looking back. Meanwhile, Zhang Man and Zhou Shuwan, who were also standing behind Chang Haonan, were almost stunned and their faces were filled with disbelief. Compared to Wu Yifan, who is hardly focused on his studies, the two of them know how difficult it is to model complex structures like airplanes. Even if they just transfer what was already drawn on the blueprint to the computer, it would be an astronomical amount of work for a novice. However, in the hands of Chang Haonan, all of this was so effortless. As he flipped his fingers while operating the keyboard and mouse, a large delta-wing conventional layout fighter model gradually appeared on the computer screen. Equivalent wing model, complete the entire aircraft pneumatic model midway through. The computer room management teacher came over to remind them that the time was up. Wu Yifan, who was afraid that Chang Haonan would be disturbed, decisively added his hour to this computer. Later, Zhou Shuwan and Zhang Man also contributed their student ID cards. Inlet Modeling Engine Modeling, Under the guidance of the system, Chang Haonan almost entered a state of selflessness in his work. When he finally completed the required modeling work, he realized that several hours had already passed. Is this the end? Zhang Man looked at the screen in front of her in a daze. Although she had just watched the entire modeling process, taking 4 hours to create such a high-precision 3D model still made her feel unreal. Strictly speaking, of course not. Chang Haonan stretched lazily and leaned back in his chair. But our course only requires aerodynamic design, so we don't care about onboard equipment, internal structure, and so on. Anyway, we know this plane can definitely fly. Amazing, Nangu, I don't think even the professors in our college can be more proficient than you, can they? Zhang Man didn't hesitate to praise Chang Haonan at all, and his title had also changed. I thought the thighs in the group were Zhou Shuwan, but now Chang Haonan, who seemed a bit crazy before, is the real hidden boss. No, learn from God. How can the madness of learning gods be called madness? That's just that ordinary people don't understand God's thoughts. If we only talk about simulation, then it's quite similar. Chang Haonan reached out and touched his thick hair, leaning back in the chair with a confident smile. He is not just boasting, and in this regard, the whole world may not be able to find someone more skilled than him. But what we said before was to calculate the performance of this aircraft. Wu Yifan scratched his head. Although he also saw that Chang Haonan was powerful, he really didn't want to give himself strength. Of course, but the calculation process can be quite time-consuming, so this time I will only calculate the performance of the inlet section. Next, as long as the finite volume method is used to solve the Euler equation for the external flow field of the body, and the finite volume method is used to solve the N's equation for the internal flow field of the inlet, typical inlet performance data can be obtained. Chang Haonan saved the model file while opening Fluent to prepare for the next step. For grid generation of complex shapes, partition-structured grids or overall unstructured grids can be used. Partition-structured grids have high computational efficiency, but the automation level of grid generation is low, and the characteristics of unstructured grids are opposite. As a research mentor, the system naturally taught both of these technologies to Chang Haonan, but the latter needed to choose one to output to the computer in front of him. Although the new version of software in 1996 can now partition grids, its functions are not yet very complete. Considering that the performance of computers in this era still has a slight gap compared to more than 20 years later, Chang Haonan ultimately chose the former with higher computational efficiency. At this critical moment, the voice of the computer room teacher came from the door again, and this time they no longer had another student ID to use. Use mine. A cold female voice sounded from the row behind Chang Haonan. A few people turned around and saw a tall girl with long hair draped over her shoulders, wearing a light blue dress, and round framed glasses standing up. She handed a red cover ID to the computer room teacher and said, "I got off the plane here, and I'll count them in the future." That document was obviously not ordinary. The computer room teacher just glanced at it and didn't even write anything on the notebook in his hand before turning around and leaving the computer room. "Thank you." After all, he was a big help, so after the computer room teacher left, Chang Haonan quickly expressed gratitude, but after speaking, he couldn't quite determine whether the other party was a teacher or a student. Yao Mengna, a second-year doctoral student, should be considered your senior sister. Yao Mengna gave a brief self-introduction and walked away from the computer she had just used to the side of Chang Haonan and the others, saying, "As long as you don't get off the computer, you can keep using it without worrying about being disturbed again." "Thank you so much, senior sister." Wu Yifan also quickly thanked with a smile on his face, but was interrupted halfway through. "It's okay, I also want to see how you plan to continue. Are you going to perform fluid dynamic simulation on the entire machine?" Obviously, Yao Mengna is also very interested in the modeling that Chang Haonan is currently working on, but due to the low voices of the four people just now, she was unable to hear the specific content clearly. Chang Haonan nodded and said, "Yes, we're ready to use Fluent to numerically solve the fully viscous Navier-Stokes equation." After hearing this answer, Yao Mengna widened her eyes slightly. She really didn't think about these few, or rather, it seemed like an undergraduate student preparing to play so much. She had noticed these people in the front row since just now, and naturally knew that all the work was done by the person sitting in front of the computer. In fact, even Yao Mengna, who has already reached her second year of doctoral studies, has only just begun to gradually get involved in computational fluid dynamics, CFD, simulations of aircraft. "You don't mind if I take a look next to you, do you?" Although Yao Mengna spoke in a questioning tone, she sat on a nearby chair before Chang Haonan could answer. "Perhaps I can still be of some help." Although she said that, Yao Mengna herself didn't actually have a particularly clear idea. She mainly wanted to find some inspiration through Chang Haonan's approach. At this moment, digital design and computer simulation are still new things for aviation designers throughout China. Just as the two of them were speaking, Chang Haonan had already imported the just completed modeling into Fluent and started meshing with the finite volume method. Haha. The next moment is when he performs. In this era, Fluent does not yet have a beautiful graphical interface and a large number of preset models that can be directly called, especially for complex simulations such as supersonic fluid dynamics, which can only be partially completed. However, these cannot be difficult for Chang Haonan, who already knows all the next steps. Zhaozuiyuan.com Since the existing software can only complete a portion of the work, write an algorithm in Fortran language to find numerical solutions for partial differential equations. Then operate Fluent to complete the lazy part by calling external programs, and then use scripts to implement automated operations. Yao Mengna, who was watching beside her, initially held a relatively relaxed attitude, but after just closing her eyes and yawning, she realized that she couldn't keep up with her thoughts at all. Especially with Chang Haonan's code input speed almost taking off, she couldn't even see the purpose of each piece of code clearly, let alone jot down the entire process. That. Yao Mengna spoke hesitantly, wanting to ask Chang Haonan for specific numerical simulation ideas, but for a moment she still couldn't bear to ask undergraduate students directly, so she had to use a more indirect expression. "Can we compare our thoughts? My thoughts seem a bit different from yours." "Okay, first let me share your thoughts and let me see if there are any issues." Chang Haonan was once again completely immersed in his work, and since he had just been reborn for a few hours, he instinctively thought he was still working as an intern in the research institute. Ah! One sentence almost broke Yao Mengna's defense. No, what does it mean to see if there are any problems? Do you really consider yourself the standard answer? Are you so confident? And most importantly, she can't come up with a complete idea at all. Yao Mengna took several deep breaths in a row, then patted her chest before finally calming down. No need, just share your thoughts and I'll compare them myself. Chapter 3. Are undergraduate students so talented now? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Okay, just remember. Chang Haonan didn't think much and continued typing on the keyboard without looking back. At this moment, his work had also entered the final part. At this moment, Yao Mengna didn't care about anything else and quickly took out her pen and notebook to prepare for recording. However, Chang Haonan, the most suspenseful attitude in the world, left the other three stunned. Is this the real big shot? Directly treating a second-year doctoral student as a second-year undergraduate student to teach. Wu Yifan suddenly regretted not being able to study well in the past 3 years. After writing the last line of code, Chang Haonan pressed the middle mouse button and dragged the programming interface back to the top. His programming format was very standardized, but he didn't write comments just to save time. Plus, the code wasn't too much, so it was easy to explain. Considering the limitations of computer performance and the symmetry of the model, half modulus is taken for calculation to save resources. The grid near the wall can locally increase density. The non-viscous flux adopts a second.orderUp wind rho.fds format. The turbulence model adopts k, omega. The SST2 equation model takes into account the high temperature effect of gases and uses a thermal complete gas model that takes into account variable specific heat in the calculation. The molecular viscosity is calculated using a formula, with adiabatic and slip-free solid boundary conditions applied to the wall, and pressure far.field and pressure outlet boundary conditions applied to the inlet and outlet, respectively. When each residual indicator decreases by at least 2 orders of magnitude and the export flow remains basically unchanged, it can be considered that the calculation converges. After spending a lot of time explaining his simulation ideas, Chang Haonan directly mobilized the program to start calculating the modeling just now, and almost habitually said to Yao Mengna, who was still writing hard, I won't talk about the specific programming statements and grid partitioning operations. They are all graduate students who should know. What? Yao Mengna looked up in confusion. Chang Haonan's words were completely incomprehensible to her. What does it mean that someone who has studied graduate school should know? How can anyone teach this kind of thing hand in hand now? Almost all of it is explored by oneself, right? And am I a graduate student or are you a graduate student? Okay, Yao Mengna admits that the undergraduate student in front of her is indeed so much better than herself in simulation. I'm so angry, but there's nothing I can do. But is this really something that undergraduate students can do? Her gaze glanced at the student ID book that Chang Haonan had placed next to the keyboard. It's the color of an undergraduate student. She even quietly opened the outer page of her student ID to confirm. Chang Haonan, Class 9302, Department of Aeronautics and Engineering, School of Aeronautics and Astronautics, Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, is a junior this year. But how could this be possible? Leaving aside computational fluid dynamics, even writing code itself is not that easy. The vast majority of students only begin to learn about computers after entering their freshman year, and considering the maximum operating time of 1 hour per day, there are very few who can perform simple programming. Unless he had already been exposed to these things before going to college. Obviously, Yao Mengna was not the only one with such thoughts, and on the other side, Zhang Man's gaze towards Chang Haonan gradually changed. Do you know who those people were in the mid-1990s who could buy a computer at home? Let's not say it's either rich or expensive, at least there must be something. In fact, at this point, Chang Haonan realized that his attitude seemed a bit wrong, but looking at Yao Mengna not far behind, he really didn't know how to say this. So I had to remain silent and let this matter pass as soon as possible. Fortunately, the awkward atmosphere did not last for too long. It's already dinner time, I'll go help you buy food. Zhang Man looked at the watch on the wall and volunteered to help run errands. Senior sister, do you also want one? Before Yao Mengna could answer, Zhou Shuwan next to him also stood up and said, it's better for me to go. It's quite far from the cafeteria here, and my feet are faster. This sentence made Chang Haonan, who had already completed the program design and was only waiting for the computer to run its results, shake his head helplessly. Zhou Shuwan did indeed have a genuine affection for Zhang Man, but the latter I neither agreed nor refused, so I hung him up for 4 years. Later on, Chang Haonan was not very clear about the situation, but these two people definitely did not get together because Zhou Shuwan, like himself, did not get married until more than 20 years later. In short, licking a dog will not have a good outcome. Don't misunderstand, Chang Haonan has never been a licking dog before. He just focused on his work when he first graduated. Later, he achieved some success in his work, got older, and went on business trips all day, so of course, he is not foolish enough to directly stop the other person from doing something. People who are immersed in love are not aware that they are being played with like monkeys, and on the contrary, he is likely to have a bad relationship as a dissuader. Wait until there's a chance to knock around a bit. If you're still not enlightened, then you can only respect and bless. In the end, Zhou Shuwan couldn't resist Zhang Man and let him run to the cafeteria to buy food. Strange. She usually asks me to go, what's going on today? Zhou Shuwan muttered somewhat puzzled as she looked at Zhang Man's departure. Ah. Wu Yifan, who had not seen such a situation for the first time, sighed while holding his forehead. What's wrong? Zhou Shuwan heard Wu Yifan sigh and thought that there was something wrong with Chang Haonan's simulation. He quickly leaned over, but the screen seemed similar to before, still a pile of code and data that he didn't quite understand. Now even Yao Mengna, who was originally full of eating gourds, couldn't help but lift her head and look at Zhou Shuwan with hopeless eyes, then show a childish expression that is beyond teaching. In fact, the workload of this simulation is not very large. Chang Haonan's goal is only to calculate the original performance of the MiG-21, especially the total pressure recovery coefficient of the inlet under several typical operating conditions, the lift coefficient of the wing at different heights and angles of attack, and the control efficiency of several control surfaces. He can also find the book on www.zhaozuiyuan.com and create the aircraft model. After all, according to his plan, there won't be any changes to the rear fuselage of the aircraft, just use it directly when the time comes. Moreover, considering the limitations of hardware performance, he only allowed the system to output performance parameters for a few design points, and did not directly run the flow field curve as was customary before the rebirth. However, despite this, by the time Zhang Man bought the rice back, the calculation had only been partially completed. What parameters are these? Zhang Man gave everyone a foam lunch box and disposable tableware from the bag in his hand, while looking at the screen in front of Chang Hao South with wide eyes. As a student majoring in Beijing Airlines, although she didn't keep up with Chang Haonan's approach to simulation just now, what these results represent is something that Zhang Man can still understand. However, she still asked in a curious and admiring tone. Well, the static pressure distribution at specific points on the inlet wall at different airspeed and angle of attack, the Mach number distribution at typical axial interface positions, and the drag coefficient at different incoming Mach numbers can be used to calculate the average total pressure recovery coefficient and total pressure distortion of the inlet. Furthermore, if these data are presented in charts, the flow field structure at the design point can also be plotted. Of course, the calculation has only been completed for more than half now, so we need to wait a bit. After Chang Haonan finished speaking, he stood up with the lunch box in his hand, ready to go to the empty classroom next to him for dinner. It was probably the limit of the management teacher to have Zhang Man bring the lunchbox into this building. If the latter saw 5 people sitting in front of the computer eating, he would probably have his blood pressure burst and fainted. Chapter 4. Next Steps of Work. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. However, perhaps it was because before his rebirth, his body did indeed suffer from a severe lack of rest, coupled with a long afternoon of sitting and hunger. Suddenly standing up, Chang Haonan felt a surge of heaviness in his head and feet, and then the edge of his vision gradually turned black. Fortunately, Wu Yifan, who was quick-witted, reached out to support him from behind and said, "Haonan, you probably haven't slept much in the past few days. Don't worry too much, there's still a lot of time for the course design. Don't worry about this 1 or 2 days. Nange, why don't you take a break after dinner? You can entrust us with tasks such as data plotting and performance analysis." Zhang Man's expression of concern didn't seem to be fake. As the same course design team, all 4 of them were in good or bad shape, so she naturally worried about the new thigh she had just hugged. Moreover, although the rest of the work is also tedious, the technical content is not high, and it is not difficult for third-year students with existing data. As an experienced thigh hugger, Zhang Man deeply understands that being in a group with a big shot does not mean he can do nothing. Although it was easy at the time, there is a high probability that there will be no next time. On the contrary, if one actively proposes to share some tasks, it is likely to gain the favor of academic elites. No need, this is the original design data for MiG-21. I just need to program the calculation first and verify if it can run smoothly. After our design is completed, we only need to make slight modifications to the model and grid mode to perform the calculation. As they spoke, the group had already walked to the next classroom. Chang Haonan opened his lunchbox and replied without looking up. 2 meat and 1 vegetable dishes paired with white rice were already considered a good meal condition in the 1990s. Let's not talk about Zhang Man's personality for now. This type of white and thin girl actually doesn't quite meet his aesthetic standards. If you insist. Chang Haonan glanced at Yao Mengna, who was eating quietly across the street. So he realized that only his own box had 2 meat dishes. Zhang Man can only be said to be a bit scheming, but not much. Well. Forget it, let's eat first. Zhang Man, who knew he had just made a mistake, showed an awkward expression on his face, but in an instant, he returned to his original state. Are you still planning to modify the design of the plane later? Yao Mengna also heard Chang Haonan's words earlier and raised her head to inquire. Yes, this is a big assignment for our aircraft design course. When Haonan first said he wanted to design a supersonic fighter jet, we thought it was unrealistic, but we didn't expect him to be so skilled. Zhou Shuwan is definitely an honest person, even praising Chang Haonan in front of his goddess. After seeing the smooth operation of the latter, the other 3 no longer had any thoughts of questioning Chang Haonan's ideas. You have some ideas. When I took this course, I designed a single-wing transport plane and got a perfect score in the end. Yao Mengna raised her head slightly, seemingly reminiscing about her past undergraduate years. In fact, based on my experience, as long as you can complete the design process without making mistakes, you can almost always get full marks. Of course, Yao Mengna is only stating a fact and has no intention of boasting. In her opinion, for students like Chang Haonan, achieving a perfect score in course design is just a matter of effortlessness and not worth mentioning. However, invisibly pretending to be coerced is the most deadly, and this sentence still made Zhou Shuwan and Wu Yifan look at each other. After all, if it weren't for Chang Haonan, they wouldn't dare say they could come up with an error-free design, even if they could design the simplest airplane, as Zhou Shuwan said. By the way, the school's computer room cannot store things. How are we going to bring back the Haonan program? After more than 10 seconds of silence, Zhou Shuwan brought the topic back to their design project. Chang Haonan, who has been bowing his head to grab rice, is currently organizing the next steps in his mind. As he did not directly ask the system to provide design results, after determining the general direction, specific details still need to be manually optimized. In fact, it means making several different designs and testing their key performance at each design point to see if some patterns can be found, and then slowly making adjustments. These are all very experiential operations. So after hearing Zhou Shuan's question, Chang Haonan almost lost his mind and answered, "Which of you brought you?" At this point, he realized something was wrong. In 1996, there was no such thing as a USB flash drive, so he quickly changed his mind and said, "Whoever brought a floppy disk, our program is not big. Just save the engineering files of the model and the CFD simulation code separately on 2 floppy disks." 4 people looked at each other without saying a word. Nowadays, many people don't even have their own computers, and few would spend money on buying floppy disks as storage media. "I have 2 empty floppy disks here, I'll lend them to you for now." Finally, Yao Mengna spoke up, "But remember to return them to me when you finish using them." Chang Haonan took the floppy disk from the other party's hand, with Yao Mengna's name written on the disk, as well as the college and office he was in. "Is Sister Yao from Academician Shan's research group?" Zhang Man next to her leaned over and took a look. Then he asked in shock. "Yes, Academician Du is my mentor," Yao Mengna replied lightly, lifting a few strands of hair hanging down from her forehead to her shoulder, as if it was just a trivial matter. Zhang Man and Zhou Shuan almost simultaneously widened their eyes. Zhaozuiyuan.com Academician Du Shan, as a leading figure in the field of aerodynamics in China, is no longer responsible for specific aircraft design projects, but his connections and resources are still important. In this era of tight research funding, having such a mentor means being exposed to more topics, which means having much more opportunities than others. And Yao Mengna is also a student of Du Shan. You should know that academician students and academician research group students may sound similar, but in reality, they are vastly different. Due to family reasons, Zhou Shuan, who had already aspired to further his studies, immediately admired this senior sister in his heart and began to hesitate whether to ask the other party about the standards for recruiting students in the research group. And Zhang Man next to him has already begun to think about how to establish a good relationship with this senior student. Only Chang Haonan and Wu Yifan remained completely indifferent to this. The former is still considering how to arrange the next work. After all, every new design requires a remodeling and calculation of the nose module. Although most of the code does not need to be rewritten, it is also a time-consuming work, and he cannot always encounter Yao Mengna with good luck in the computer room. As for the latter, they have no interest in their major and are currently contemplating a business deal they will be going out to discuss in the next 2 days. They have not even heard the other people's conversation just now. After dinner, Chang Haonan waited for a while longer and had the computer run all the calculation results. After receiving the prompt from the system that the project had ended successfully, he copied the files to 2 floppy disks and rubbed his slightly swollen eyes, taking a long breath of relief. On the one hand, the preliminary work has finally been completed, and on the other hand, it also proves that this system is really amazing. Chapter 5. Transformation Plan for J.7. You are listening at novelfull.audio. And then what are we going to do? Zhou Shuan watched as Chang Haonan turned off his computer, feeling unsatisfied. He used to think he was talented in his studies, but today he did see what it means to have someone outside of him and heaven outside of him. Then of course, I'll go back to sleep and stay up late for several days. If I don't get enough sleep, I'll die suddenly. Chang Haonan took out 2 floppy disks and carefully put them into his backpack. Then he stood up and moved his muscles and bones, saying, "Old Wu is right. There is still time for course design, so it's not urgent for 1 or 2 days." After returning to the dormitory, Chang Haonan quickly took a shower and almost fell asleep as soon as he touched the pillow. Probably because he didn't rest well for a long time before, but when Chang Haonan woke up, it was already noon the next day. He almost habitually wanted to go to the bedside and touch his phone to see if there were any WeChat messages, and after grabbing everything, he realized that he had returned to 1996. Fortunately, it's a Sunday, so there's no need to worry about class. Haonan, what did you do yesterday afternoon? When we came back at night, we could hear your snoring from outside the door. For over 2 years, you slept soundly. As soon as Chang Haonan sat up from the bed, a voice came from his upper bunk. He looked up and saw a boy with flat hair and short hair holding a book wrapped in a cover. Chang Haonan remembers his name is Huang Jiqiang and his grades are very good, but he really doesn't have any more specific impressions. Hey, I've been busy with the course design for the past few days, so I'm so tired. I'm really sorry, said Chang Haonan, picking up his basin, cup, and towel from the nearby shelf. It's no surprise that Wu Yifan is not in the dormitory. He has been living outside for most of the time since his sophomore year. Course design. Huang Jiqiang put down his book and looked at Chang Haonan below. Do you really want to rely on you two undergraduate students to design a fighter jet? As one of the top students in the class, Huang Jiqiang is very clear about the difficulty of designing a supersonic aircraft, and he also knows very well about Chang Haonan who lives in his own bunk. The other party cannot be considered a talented player, let alone in that course group. There are still 2 procrastinators, Wu Yifan and Zhang Man, who can actually play a role. That's enough, it's not something too complicated, Chang Haonan said casually with a wave of his hand as he thought about which improvement plan to choose. After finishing speaking, he ran away from the dormitory all the way, leaving only Huang Jiqiang with a surprised expression as he watched his figure disappear from the door. It's really crazy. Huang Jiqiang shook his head and picked up the book again to study. Jiqiang, you say. He can't really design it, can he? Lu Ran, who was also reading on the upper bunk across from him, asked. Cut, just them. Huang Jiqiang sneered and looked left and right to confirm that there were no other people in the dormitory. Then he continued, look at all the members of the academic department and academicians. They can only copy homework according to the shabby designs of the Soviet Union. If you ask me, they are all TM waste, let alone a few of them. After speaking, Huang Jiqiang paused for a moment and flipped the book in his hand over to show it to the other person. The content inside is actually all in English. I asked my sister to send me a design manual for an aircraft from the United States. There were many things in it that were not even covered in our textbooks, and the teacher didn't even talk about it in class. Is this all for designing an aircraft? Huang Jiqiang said with a disdainful expression. He originally intended to go abroad after graduating from undergraduate studies, but the undergraduate study abroad quota offered by Beijing Airlines is not available every year, so he had to settle down and plan to pursue a master's degree in China first. After graduating from master's degree, the number of spots available for studying abroad for a doctoral degree will increase significantly. Of course, the prerequisite is that he cannot participate in classified projects during his master's degree. It seems it must be you, Brother Chang. Lu Ran felt relieved when he heard him say this and quickly gave Huang Jiqiang a thumbs up. The dormitory quickly returned to tranquility. However, despite Huang Jiqiang's words, Chang Haonan's calm tone and movements lingered in his mind, making it difficult for him to continue concentrating. Do they have any trump cards that I don't know? Huang Jiqiang frowned slightly and pondered in his heart. On the other hand, after finishing his toiletries as quickly as possible, Chang Haonan changed his clothes and prepared to go to the cafeteria for lunch before meeting the other 3 people in that classroom. After all, there is still a lot of text, drawing, and simple calculation work in the course design homework, which he cannot handle alone. Moreover, the additional 3 hours of computer time is crucial. When Chang Haonan arrived at the classroom that several people had agreed to arrive, Wu Yifan and Zhou Shuwan were already waiting inside. However, the 3 of them waited for more than 10 minutes until the agreed time passed without seeing Zhang Man's shadow. At this time, everyone didn't have a phone, so they couldn't reach Zhang Man or watch short videos on their social media, so they had to sit and wait. Speaking of which, was the software you used yesterday called Fluent, Haonan? Wu Yifan, who had been in a daze just now, suddenly asked. Yeah. Chang Haonan nodded and said, you should at least listen to it in class. Although we haven't learned this software before, we should have introduced it before. Ah. Is that so? Wu Yifan's expression was somewhat bewildered. No, I remember that computer simulation software was only introduced in the course of design methodology in my senior year. I saw it in a senior's book before. Zhou Shuwan also turned around and joined the conversation. Haonan, you probably thought we had all learned it when you were self-taught, right? Chang Haonan awkwardly touched the back of his head. He only remembered that he had been exposed to Fluent software during his undergraduate studies, but he had forgotten all about it in his early years. I'm sorry for being late. I went to the library to search for some materials and didn't pay attention to the time. At this moment, Zhang Man, carrying a backpack and a huge cloth bag in his hand, finally appeared at the door panting heavily. Chang Haonan pursed his lips. He had never liked people without a sense of time, but he didn't say much. Since everyone has arrived, let's prepare to start the next step. Well, regarding the improvement plan for this aircraft, I have found some design plans that can be referenced. I'm not sure if you're interested in listening, Nan. Ah. Chang Haonan did not expect such a situation. It seems that the other party's lateness is not entirely due to personal factors. Since Nangu has already analyzed the performance of the MiG-21 prototype yesterday, our next step should be to determine the general direction of improvement, right Nangu? Zhang Man raised his head again and blinked at Chang Haonan. Yes, that's right. Chang Haonan was completely unmoved and just nodded. The replica model of the MiG-21, the J.7, is currently, and even in the future, the aviation industry of our country can provide a large number of main fighter jets to the Air Force. However, it has been almost 40 years since the prototype was put into service. Therefore, my idea is to base on existing mature technology and improve the combat effectiveness of the improved model as much as possible within the capabilities of the aviation department. At this point, Chang Haonan lowered his head to look at the enamel water cup he had on hand, took a deep breath, and continued, the feeling of powerlessness we had when facing the Nimitz and Independence earlier this year cannot be repeated again. Even before his rebirth, many years have passed, but Chang Haonan still remembers the anger and powerlessness he had when he saw the news back then. Chapter 6. Aren't you bullying honest people? You are listening at novelfull.audio. The other three people looked at Chang Haonan, who was clenching his fists tightly. Of course, they knew that it was precisely because of this that they decided to make themselves more difficult in their course assignments. What they didn't know was that Chang Haonan almost became an Air Force pilot back then, but during a medical examination, he was found to have poor bite and was brushed off. But Haonan, if that's the case, it's not just a matter of aircraft design. Zhou Shuwan has been exposed to it at home since childhood and understands nature more than others. Based on existing mature technology, we have to consider production and manufacturing issues, but we are still college students after graduation, and we have no way to know the specific level of aviation manufacturing technology in China at present. Chang Haonan looked at Zhou Shuwan next to him and stood with his hand down at his desk, saying, from the beginning, I wasn't prepared to just create a design that couldn't be placed on the ground. According to common sense, Zhou Shuwan's words are certainly correct. However, as a person who has been reborn more than 20 years later, he himself has surpassed common sense. In fact, at the beginning, when it comes to improving the J.7, Chang Haonan's first thought was naturally the FC-1 Xiaolong fighter jet derived from the Super 7 plan modified by magic. This aircraft no longer has any trace of the original model from its appearance. But after seeing the real performance of computers in this era yesterday, he realized that without access to supercomputing resources, it was already difficult to design the DSI intake duct on an ordinary PC, let alone other parts of the body that had undergone significant changes. And currently, the best domestically produced aircraft engine, the turbojet 13F, is not enough to drive a third-generation fighter jet. There's no way, we have to eat every bite of food, and research needs to be done step by step. The development of the aviation industry is not an overnight process. Currently, he is only an undergraduate student and has limited resources to leverage, making it difficult to maximize the efficiency of the system. At the same time point in the previous life, Chang Haonan's Yuang indeed designed a type of aircraft that could equip the People's Air Force to enhance combat effectiveness. But now, with a lifetime of rebirth and even system assistance, the greater significance of this J.7 improvement plan for him is a stepping stone. A knocking brick that leads to a broader world. Therefore, in addition to reflecting a certain degree of progressiveness, the design scheme must be fast and grounded enough to be completed within the time specified in the course design assignment, and reflect my current overall understanding of the development of the aviation industry. Chang Haonan remembers that his teacher for this course was named Lu Hongbo, a very young professor. Shortly after the start of the next semester, he was loaned out to participate in the airworthiness certification and technical improvement work of the Xinzhou 60 aircraft. The timing happens to be after the end of their graduate recommendation process. So many of Professor Lu's students also directly or indirectly participated in related work. All are opportunities. And what Chang Haonan needs most now is precisely this kind of opportunity. After determining the basic principles of the improvement plan, Zhang Man was the first to speak up. Nange, I just checked some existing improvement ideas for the MiG.21 or J.7 in the library. Zhang Man said, putting his backpack and cloth bag on the table, and then took out a bunch of materials. Firstly, our country has already implemented an improvement plan, replacing the MiG-21's large delta wings with double delta wings, reducing the average chord length of the wings, increasing the aspect ratio, and focusing on improving the aircraft's low to medium altitude maneuverability. However, due to the lack of improvement in the intake duct, the nose cone still does not have enough space to accommodate radar, so not to mention beyond line of sight, it does not even have all-weather combat capabilities. Zhang Man pulled out a 3-view view of the J.7E and placed it in front of Chang Haonan. After all, it was active equipment and detailed design drawings were impossible to obtain. Then, he secretly glanced at the latter's expression with his spare light. After discovering that there were no changes, Zhang Man decisively pushed this blueprint aside and took out another document, which was much more detailed and even had many specific data. The second improvement is the MiG Design Bureau's own, which is the MiG-21MF and MiG-21bis. While the overall aerodynamic layout remains unchanged, the body is enlarged, the intake cone is increased, and radar is installed inside. However, the cost is a significant decrease in maneuverability. I think this idea is good. Zhou Shuwan stood up and looked at the blueprint on the table. In the late 1980s, we also designed a similar concept for the J.7C, but only produced a dozen in the end. I think we can further improve on this basis, increase the volume of the nose cone, and with the current radar technology definitely stronger than before, it may even launch radar-guided air-to-air missiles like the Thunderbolt 4. In 1996, the Thunderbolt 4 had already been taken down, while the Thunderbolt 11 was still in a difficult process of replication. However, this did not prevent students at the University of Aeronautics and Astronautics from imagining a new, long-range weapon. However, when the latter was only halfway through, Zhang Man next to him confirmed through Chang Haonan's expression that this was not the idea the other party wanted. Therefore, as soon as Zhou Shuwan finished speaking, she immediately expressed the opposite opinion. I don't think this is quite in line with Nanji's idea just now. There are too few changes to the plane, and choosing this plan really looks down on Nanji's ability. Find Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. And just now, Zhou Shuwan, who was still in high spirits, was directly denied by his goddess without leaving any face, and even brought up his recognition of Chang Haonan's ability. Therefore, he was completely embarrassed, looking at Zhang Man and then at Chang Haonan with a slightly furrowed brow next to him. Originally, when Zhang Man just pulled out a bunch of materials and began to sort out his thoughts, Chang Haonan's perception of her was actually greatly improved. Not to mention whether she was useful, but at least she showed a willingness to take the initiative to help you with things rather than just stand idly by. But her subsequent words and actions quickly shattered the positive image that had been established in Chang Haonan's heart. You should know that although this big assignment is a group of 4, not everyone in the group has the same grade when grading. Instead, it will fluctuate based on the contributions made by each member to the work, based on the group assignment score. Chang Haonan, who has been identified as the Thai, and Wu Yifan, who is already preparing to row and is not concerned about the results, naturally rank first and last in the contribution rankings. Therefore, there is currently only room for discussion on who is second, Zhang Man and Zhou Shuwan. Whether it's flattery or being versatile, these are all part of a person's abilities. Although Chang Haonan himself is not good at them, he will never look down on those who are good at them. As for the relationship between Zhou Shuwan and Zhang Man, it has nothing to do with him as an outsider. But just as Zhang Man was trying to curry favor with him by observing his words and expressions, he didn't forget to secretly stomp on Zhou Shuwan's foot. This nature is different. If Chang Haonan directly agrees with Zhang Man's ideas at this time, it is equivalent to being used as a gun by the latter. Zhou Shuwan is an honest person, but an honest person cannot be so bullied. This will affect unity. Chapter 7. Scheme Finalization. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the contrary, the reason I didn't choose this plan is that it has undergone too many changes. Chang Haonan's one sentence solidified Zhang Man's smile on his face. Do you remember what I just said? We need to rely on existing mature technology. Although this enlarged version of the plan may not seem to have changed much in appearance, if it is implemented in manufacturing, the entire aircraft body will need to change, and stronger aviation engines are also needed, which does not comply with our principles. Zhou Shuwan's face next to him finally looked a little better. He didn't care much about his ideas being rejected, but was worried that Chang Haonan might really misunderstand his meaning. After all, we have received some professional training. When we see a design, we cannot rely solely on intuition to see the appearance like when we were freshmen. We should be able to think of deeper things, said Chang Haonan, looking up at Zhang Man across from us. Hey, I can see something deeper, and you all know it. I haven't scored 80 in any major courses except for English, so I'll just listen to Nanshan's advice on technical matters. Zhang Man, do you have any other plans? Wu Yifan's words perfectly eased the situation, not only giving Zhang Man a step down, but also avoiding too much deadlock between her and Chang Haonan. After being slightly tapped by Chang Haonan, Zhang Man quickly regained his initially bright and radiant expression, as if nothing had happened, but he didn't make any further small moves, just pulled out the last piece of information. In fact, compared to the previous 2 real documents, what Zhang Man brought out this time were only 2 photos. There is also a technology validation aircraft from the MiG Design Bureau called the E8, which does not have much detailed information. From the photos, it appears that the nose intake has been directly changed to the belly intake, and a pair of front wings have been added. Before Zhang Man could finish speaking, Chang Haonan picked up one of the photos and began to examine it. The E8 aircraft itself has undergone significant changes compared to the MiG-21, and also involves issues with 3-wing control, which is not a design that can be completed in a short period of time. However, the pictures on the table help him recall an obscure improved version of the J.7. The J.7FS. An improved design that changes the nose intake of the J.7 to a lower jaw intake, while maintaining the remaining parts of the aircraft, especially the rear fuselage, unchanged. Due to the fact that this project was entirely self-funded by 611 Institute and there were no initiating users, coupled with insufficient research on the mandibular intake duct at that time, only one prototype was built for flight testing, and there was no follow-up. However, Chang Haonan knows that the potential for this improved model is actually quite significant. More importantly, the research on the mandibular intake duct itself is of great significance. Because future aspirated hypersonic aircraft will also be equipped with similar but more advanced inlet structures. Before Chang Haonan's rebirth, he was preparing to test a hypersonic missile design using a jaw-shaped three-dimensional internal turning inlet at Base 29. According to the timeline, this redesign should not have been released yet in 1996, and may not have even started yet. Improve the intake design of the J.7 aircraft to adapt to larger radar sizes and ensure flight performance is at least not inferior to the original model. The specific idea is to change the nose intake duct to a dual-module jaw-type intake duct, freeing up the nose space for the radar cover. At the same time, the radar cover can serve as a conical front body and be integrated with the intake duct to achieve first-stage compression of the incoming flow, using a downward-facing external compression method. The intake duct achieves secondary compression of the airflow, using an internal compression method with the direction facing both sides and upwards, while the rest of the body remains unchanged as Chang Haonan's ideas continue to improve in his mind. The system also provided new prompts. Improve project consumption technology points. 8 points, directly provide project results consumption points. 80 points. Are you sure to carry out the J.7 aircraft inlet improvement project? Confirm. Almost like yesterday, in the moment after Chang Haonan confirmed the project, a massive amount of information appeared in his memory in the form of branding. Although he had not been exposed to many knowledge for many years, he was as proficient as if he had used it thousands of times. That is to say, the system can not only provide specific steps to complete a project, but also simultaneously improve Chang Haonan's relevant abilities. And this ability will not disappear with the completion of the project. For example, the proficiency he gained yesterday in operating fluid dynamics simulation software of this era and the ability to directly write programs to solve partial differential equations in Fortran language still exist. However, if you want to achieve the incredible efficiency of non-human operations like yesterday, you still need to rely on the buff provided by the system for ongoing projects. Haonan, are you planning to choose this? Zhou Shuwan also took another photo and looked at it. But isn't the design change of this three-wing surface even bigger? No, it's just that the train of thought is similar to this. Chang Haonan shook his head. The design of the Yi-8's intake duct is located on the belly of the aircraft, resulting in significant changes to the entire body structure. We can advance the intake duct to a position almost flush below the nose and design a jaw-shaped intake duct. Chang Haonan took a pen and paper and drew a sketch, while expressing his design ideas in as simple and straightforward a way as possible. This can ensure that the length of the intake duct is close to the original design. Please refer to Xueyuan www.zhaoxuyuan.com for more information on the Body 1. The section after the cross-dot section does not need to be modified, and we can also design the radar cover as part of the air intake mechanism. The conical radar cover pre-compresses the gas to improve the overall air intake performance. The reason why it takes so much effort is not because Chang Haonan is a good teacher, but because according to the design method provided by the system, it is necessary to manually determine the half-cone angle of a conical precursor before calculating the optimal solution for the corresponding inlet design. In other words, the combination of intake ports/conical forebodies designed at different half-cone angles is significantly different. However, Chang Haonan does not know exactly how many half-cone angles correspond to the design scheme that works best when installed on the J.7. In the field of design, selecting initial values is largely based on experience, but before Chang Haonan's rebirth, as a military screw, he did not have the experience of focusing on the overall design of a model, so he needs to come up with several different plans to simulate their performance when combined with the J.7 aircraft, then explore the patterns from them, and finally find the best performance choice. The workload of this process is very large, but many of the content is actually not innovative and repetitive work, so it can be entrusted to 3 other people to complete, while Chang Haonan himself focuses on the most critical part. On the one hand, this can improve efficiency, and on the other hand, it also aligns with his vision of the future usage of the system, which can be seen as a rehearsal. In this way, the workload is indeed much smaller, and many parts can even be interchangeable with the original model. Zhou Shuwan slammed his fist into the palm of his other hand and made a crisp, pop sound. Then Haonan, tell us what to do next. We all follow your command. Chapter 8. New Design Methods. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. At this moment, the door of the classroom was pushed open, and 4 more people walked in from outside. This teaching building is shared by their entire School of Aviation Science and Engineering, so it is not surprising that other students appear in the classroom. If there are even 2 to 3 dozen people in the same classroom before the end of the semester, the 4 people who are focused on researching the plan are completely indifferent. Haonan. The first of the 4 people who just came in was Huang Jiqiang, the upper bunk of Chang Haonan. He naturally recognized the former at a glance and said, "Are you also doing course design here?" In fact, Huang Jiqiang specifically came here. Since the start of this semester in March this year, Chang Haonan has always had a bitter attitude, and the idea of designing a fighter jet is almost well known to everyone in the dormitory. However, for Huang Jiqiang, Chang Haonan in that state is not worth worrying about. He is very clear about the opponent's upper limit, and his abilities will not be improved just because of anger. And he doesn't think there's anything worth being angry about. However, this morning Chang Haonan's unconventional and light-hearted demeanor made him feel a bit uneasy, so he decided to scout to see to what extent the former had achieved. Yeah, Lao Lu's class is so careless. Chang Haonan didn't look up, but continued to sketch the intake duct and nose section on the paper, ready to tell the other 3 people what they needed to do. In addition to having 10 credits second only to his graduation thesis, which greatly affects his GPA, the course of aircraft design also attracts many experts from the college as judges in the final defense stage of the course design. And these people are often the judges when conducting the interview for graduate admission without examination. The interval between 2 things is usually only about a month. So any student who aspires to further their studies must invest 12% of their energy into this course. The 4 people who had just entered placed their tools and books on a table not far away, and then Huang Jiqiang, the leader, slowly walked towards Chang Haonan and said, "So where did you go?" "Just selected the design plan, it's a long time ago." Chang Haonan still didn't look up. He really doesn't have much impression of Huang Jiqiang, and he doesn't take him too seriously. The things we need to talk about next are just some preliminary parts of the design work, so we don't care about being heard by others. And can you understand it or just say it? On the contrary, Zhang Man was very vigilant about Huang Jiqiang's constant approach, and calmly took a step to the side, blocking the latter a few steps away from the table. Huang Jiqiang tried several times, but due to the narrow aisle between the tables and chairs, he ultimately failed to cross the obstruction. Cut. Although he couldn't take another step forward, the petite figure of Zhang Man couldn't block his view. Huang Jiqiang easily saw 2 black and white photos on the table, as well as the sketch that Chang Haonan was hand-drawing. Therefore, he took it for granted that he was preparing to replicate the design through the photos. This immediately reassured him, shook his head, turned around, and left. As expected, big waste can only teach small waste. In the end, we still have to copy according to the Soviet Union. Besides, aircraft design is not a sketch. What can we design from 2 photos? Huang Jiqiang thought to himself and lamented that he had just become overly alarmist. At this moment, Chang Haonan didn't even know that he had been scolded in the hearts of others. He had already drawn 2 diagrams and brought over a piece of paper to prepare the steps on it. The other 3 people quickly took out their notebooks and pens to prepare for recording. They still remember yesterday when the second-year doctoral student, who was supervised by the academician himself, obediently took notes in front of Chang Hao South. The general process is like this: because we are integrating the design of the intake duct in the front fuselage, I will first select 5 different initial design values, which are the cone front body, or the half-cone angle of the radar cover. Chang Haonan pointed to the tip of the radar cover on the sketch and marked it on it alpha, the symbol. What you 3 need to do is help me determine the design parameters corresponding to each initial value. In more than 20 years, this process can be completely handed over to computers, but at this time, at least under their current conditions, many things still need to be calculated manually, especially by consulting relevant engineering manuals. Zhou Shuwan and 3 others nodded like chickens pecking at rice. The steps are like this. Let me explain them first, and if there is anything you don't understand, be sure to ask clearly. Chang Haonan said and wrote A1 on the paper. The first step is to set the conical precursor busbar, fix the initialization half-cone angle, and perform dimensionless transformation according to the length of the cone. The second step is for me to do, taking the average Mach number of the flow field near the inlet as the reference flow field design for the Mach number. After all, this is still an aircraft, so the design point for the later part should be around 1.6 Mach, not too high. The third step is to take the intersection of the 3-dimensional inner transition line of the intake duct and the generatrix of the conical forebody in the longitudinal symmetry plane of the conical forebody as the installation positioning point. The angle between the axis of the incident inner conical shock wave in the intake duct and the axis of the conical forebody is calculated as the installation angle of the intake duct. The specific calculation formula is: Step 4. The shape of the upper lip of the intake duct is obtained by intersecting the inner cone shock wave incident on the intake duct with the lower surface of the conical precursor, and the shape of the inner lip is obtained by intersecting the longitudinal symmetry surface of the conical precursor with the inner cone shock wave incident on the intake duct. I will also do the fifth step, which is based on the 3-dimensional shape of the inlet and generates the internal profile of the inlet by conducting streamline tracking within the selected reference flow field. According to these 5 steps calculation of the intake duct, in theory, selecting the optimal design under the half-cone angle at Xueba www.zhaoxuan.com is necessary. As for which design works better after being installed on the body of the MiG-21, CFD simulation will need to be done again like yesterday. I will run the results and you will be responsible for organizing the data and making charts, which should be able to intuitively find the optimal solution. Of course, in the steps provided by the system, there is also a process to go to the blowing hole at the end, which was directly ignored by Chang Haonan. If he can directly apply for resources like supersonic wind tunnels and still use them to play J.7 with 3 undergraduate students. After Chang Haonan wrote the last step on paper, he threw his pen aside and stood up to look at the 3 teammates in front of him. Do you understand? A moment of silence. I understand a bit, but I'm not sure where I didn't understand the parts that I didn't understand. Zhou Shuwan scratched his head with a distressed expression and said, "Let's go to the library first. Let's start calculating then. If we can't figure it out, I'll ask you again." "That's okay." Chang Haonan nodded and then packed his things on the table into his bag. Zhou Shuwan almost habitually helped Zhang Man organize the pile of information she brought, and the 4 of them quickly got up and left. The area of this classroom is not very large, and when Chang Haonan first spoke, he did not deliberately lower his voice. Therefore, Huang Jiqiang and the other 4 sitting next to him also listened to these contents clearly. "Chang, did you hear what Chang Haonan and his team discussed earlier?" One of them leaned in front of Huang Jiqiang and whispered, "What do you mean? It seems like they really have ideas like this." A sentence made Huang Jiqiang furrow his brow and cast a displeased glance at his teammate next to him. He didn't understand either. Chapter 9. There is also a gap between top students. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. At the beginning of Chang Haonan's speech, Huang Jiqiang didn't actually pay attention, but soon realized that the other party was definitely not just selecting a design plan, but had already determined the specific design steps and calculation ideas. As for the subsequent calculation steps, as Chang Haonan was accompanied by his own hand-drawn sketch, Huang Jiqiang, who couldn't see the figure, naturally felt completely confused. Not only that, he has not even heard many nouns spoken by Chang Haonan. "I'm afraid they're just talking nonsense," another person in the group whispered. "I've never heard much of what he said during class." After hearing these words, Huang Jiqiang's face finally improved slightly. "I only heard them say things like conical forebody and intake duct, which seemed to have some meaning." Lu Ran sat slightly closer to Chang Haonan and the others, but still heard a few key words. Upon hearing this sentence, Huang Jiqiang suddenly remembered that he had seen similar content in the English design manual before. Thinking of this, he quickly took the book out of his backpack and quickly flipped through the pages. Damn it, Brother Chang is still amazing. He can understand everything in English. But at this moment, Huang Jiqiang turned a deaf ear to the compliments around him, just lowered his head and quickly flipped through the book. An integrated design method of inlet and conical forebody. That's it. Huang Jiqiang quickly flipped through the section in the book based on his memory. The integrated design method of the intake duct and conical forebody was first applied by Webster and Busey in the design of supersonic cruise missiles, achieving considerable results. However, the design method is still not mature enough and requires a large amount of computer simulation, which is very difficult. Seeing this, Huang Jiqiang instantly widened his eyes and his pupils trembled. He quickly flipped back to the next page where he wrote some basic design ideas and steps. After spending a few minutes translating the awkward and difficult English in the book, Huang Jiqiang realized that the content on it roughly matched what Chang Haonan had just said. Obviously, the other party is not just talking nonsense. How could it be? Huang Jiqiang's breathing suddenly became heavy, and he muttered to himself in an incredulous tone. This is a design concept that is said to be difficult and not mature enough in design manuals from the United States. When Huang Jiqiang saw it, he thought that no one in the whole of China could have thought of this clever design method, and perhaps no one had the ability to perform the computer simulation required for this design. However, just now Chang Haonan, an ordinary undergraduate student at Capital University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, spoke the design process very clearly, even more perfect than the content in the manual. And at the end, it seems to be mentioned that he had already conducted a CFD simulation yesterday. Huang Jiqiang has naturally understood this type of computer-aided design tool and roughly knows how much workload it involves. This is impossible. Huang Jiqiang's lips trembled as he muttered to himself again, then turned his head to look in the direction where Chang Haonan and the four of them had just left, his eyes filled with suspicion. However, when he refocused his gaze on the book again, he suddenly showed a happy expression again. The last sentence in the book stated that there is currently no very accurate way to obtain the capture area of the intake duct and the three-dimensional shape of the inlet in integrated design, so to this extent, experience is still needed. Chang Haonan and a few undergraduate students are obviously unlikely to have such experience. So even if a similar shape is designed, it can only be considered as a semi-finished product at most, or just draw a random intake structure, and in any case, it is impossible to get a high score. Huang Jiqiang is well aware that what Professor Lu Hongba hates the most is students who are unwilling to stay grounded despite their insufficient abilities. Never mind, let's leave them alone. Let's finish our own design first. Huang Jiqiang took a few deep breaths, forcing himself to appear calm, and then took out various materials and tools from his bag. Their group is preparing to design a light seaplane with dual buoys based on the Pilatus PC.6 aircraft, for tasks such as tourism, fisheries management, and water patrols. The reason for choosing this is mainly because Huang Jiqiang received a book with an identical design case, which only requires a slight refinement of the calculation steps. According to his ideas, this design should be enough to stand out from a pile of works that are essentially just semi-finished or model aircraft. On the other side, The reading area of the library naturally prohibits noise, but the library of Jingqing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics has set up some separate small classrooms around the reading area, where meetings or group discussions can take place. At this time, Chang Haonan and his 4 companions are sitting inside, with various engineering operation manuals found from the library on the table. In this era where even calculators are not very popular, various empirical coefficients in engineering calculations, and even approximate numerical solutions obtained through commonly used square root operations, need to be consulted in books. After an afternoon, under the guidance of Chang Haonan, except for Wu Yifan, who had a very weak foundation, the other 2 finally barely mastered the calculation method of the entire process. Wu Yifan scratched his head, feeling a bit embarrassed that he couldn't make a difference. Alright, you can leave all the work of writing and drawing charts to me. I'm really not good at calculating these things. In today's era, even a graduation thesis needs to be handwritten, let alone this type of course design. Therefore, the final design plan and instructions must be implemented on paper, and Wu Yifan happens to have a beautiful pen hand. This is also one of the reasons why he has hardly studied since his freshman year, but has never failed any courses. Chang Haonan's own workload is fixed, so the remaining work content is allocated among the other 3 people. So he looked to Zhou Shuwan and Zhang Man for their opinions, and both of them said there was no problem. By the way, it's already late today. Do you want to go out for dinner? It's my treat. Wu Yifan looked out the window at the gradually dark sky and touched his stomach. The 3 of them all looked towards Chang Haonan. Alright, that's it for today. Let's go eat. Chang Haonan also knows the truth that too much is better than too much. Besides, there are still more than 3 weeks left until the deadline for course design, so there's really no need to worry. More importantly, he himself is also hungry. 10 minutes later, the 4 of them appeared at a roast duck restaurant next to the school. Speaking of which, Nan Gu, why didn't you pay attention when you were explaining your thoughts to us this afternoon? Huang Jiqiang and his team have been eavesdropping on us, and I noticed them all. After ordering, Zhang Man asked with a displeased expression, those few people are really excessive. Eavesdropping, then you have to be able to listen and understand. Chang Haonan laughed directly. I told you directly in front of the sketch, did you understand at that time? Zhang Man showed an awkward expression. I didn't understand, but you're different. You're all academic achievers. What if he understands and then copies our design? Haha. Chang Haonan shook his head mysteriously and replied slowly, there is also a gap between academic elites. Chapter 10. The Battle of J.8F22. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Although Chang Haonan himself only casually spoke with emotion, for the other 3, it was like pretending to be invisible. There was a burst of applause and cheers in the private room. Nanshan Nyobi. Southern God is domineering. Chang Haonan quickly reached out and pressed, indicating a low key tone. In fact, in less than 2 days from being reborn yesterday to today, he has realized that not only has his body become much younger, but also his mentality seems to be closer to a state of being in his 20s rather than his 40s. I really have returned to my youth. Chang Haonan looked at his hands, which were not yet wrinkled, and finally felt a sense of authenticity about being reborn. Then go make up for those regrets, whether it's for the country or oneself. At this moment, Zhou Shuwan suddenly reached out and patted him, saying, Nan Shen, don't think about course design when eating. The development and construction of the military also require a meal. Chang Haonan, who had come to his senses, realized that the roast duck had already been served. Obviously, the other party thought he was still thinking about the plane. If there are any advantages compared to more than 20 years later in the 1990s, it is probably only during this era that Beijing roast duck is generally not as crappy as it was later. The taste of any restaurant is guaranteed. Of course, the price is also really exaggerated. People like Chang Haonan, who live on an average of less than 200 yuan per month, find it difficult to afford it. 4 people were chatting while eating, and the content was mainly various anecdotes and gossip. Most of the time, Chang Haonan just listened and only occasionally interjected a sentence. After all, these were just past events for the other 3, but for him, they were already quite distant memories. At a moment when none of the 4 people spoke, Chang Haonan could clearly hear the conversation coming from the neighboring private room. "Hey, have you heard about it? The new generation fighter jet from the United States, F-22, seems to be making its maiden flight." A sentence instantly caught the attention of Chang Haonan and Zhou Shuwan. Since neither of the thighs in the group was ready to continue chatting, Zhang Man and Wu Yifan naturally did not continue to speak. "Isn't it several years since the first flight?" said another slightly lower voice. "That's the prototype YF-22, and it said that the first flight next year will be the production model F-22. I guess it's about to enter service," the third explained in a slightly sharp voice. "Sigh, then. Looking at the situation at the beginning of this year, we can't even deal with their third-generation fighter jets F-14 and F-18. If this new generation fighter jet comes into service, wouldn't it? The difference is even greater." The person speaking in a low voice, but this time there was a hint of anxiety in their tone. "Our country's latest fighter jet should be the J.7E from 1990. Yes, but that plane doesn't even have a radar and can only fight during the day. What's the use of it?" The first speaker just finished speaking and hiccuped. "The only one who can fight beyond line of sight is the Su-27 bought from the Big Brother. It's too few, and there's also the J.8B, not much." Then came a wave of sighs and sighs. "Let me tell you, if the J.8.3 can be put into service in 2 years, relying on its high-altitude, high-speed capabilities, and new radar, it may not be able to compete with the new American aircraft. Dream it, no matter how much you modify the second-generation machine, being able to barely play a dozen third-generation machines is considered the pinnacle. But even if we could fight one more, that's how we did it back then. From the War of Resistance to aid Korea, we never took advantage of our equipment. After all, the Air Force is different. During the Korean War, our MiG-15 hit F-86. Although the pilots were inexperienced, the aircraft at least did not have inferior capabilities. The Americans even had equipment like the F-9F that was not as good as ours in terms of performance. 2 days ago, Chang Haonan was still in an era where the WS-15 had already been equipped with the J.20 for test flights. At this time, he suddenly heard the story of the J.8 battle with the F-22, and there was even a vague sense of time and space travel. After a moment, he realized that this was not a trance. "You said our country's aircraft manufacturers can't even make a third-generation plane. Spending so much taxpayers' money, they have to have pilots fly J.7 to fight bayonets with them. Damn it. What a bunch of useless people. You're right, it's a pity that we couldn't introduce F-16 back then. So F-16/J-79 is just a monkey version, there's no shame, Americans are not a good cake." The sound of chatting next door had a faint hint of drunkenness. Chang Haonan saw Zhou Shuan's fist clench tightly and then slowly release. The words of the few people next door were very unpleasant, but from their conversation, it could be seen that they were not hating the Kuomintang. They were just disappointed or even desperate because they saw the huge gap between them and their strong enemies. Although the topic quickly shifted to the upcoming Atlanta Olympics, the atmosphere between Chang Haonan and the 4 of them was still affected by this. "Nan Shen, if F-22 is about to serve, what measures can we take to deal with it?" Zhou Shuwan drank the beer in his glass and turned to ask Chang Haonan. "It's not that fast," Chang Haonan shook his head and said in a very confident tone. "The difference between YF-22 and F-22 is very big, and after all, they are a new generation fighter jet. Even Americans need to learn a lot bit. In history, the F-22 did not officially enter service until 2005. At this time, China military industry had already passed its darkest hour. However, in the nearly 10 years ahead, the Raptor in test flight status did bring a lot of pressure to China. Ah. I hope so, Zhou Shuwan sighed. Zhaoshuyuan.com, don't worry, there will be. Chang Haonan patted the other person's shoulder and said, so aren't we working hard for this? Wu Yifan and Zhang Man did not participate in the discussion throughout. The former was indeed not familiar with these matters and could not intervene, while the latter was completely unable to empathize with the emotions of Chang Haonan and Zhou Shuwan. Zhang Man's parents have little education, but they have been going into business since the late 1980s and their family is not short of money. However, in this era, having money does not mean having knowledge, so from her first day in college, all she had in mind was one thing. How to use the platform of Beijing Airlines to climb higher and see a wider world, preferably to go abroad. But studying abroad was not just about having money in 1996. Of course, she could accept self-payment, but without access, she wouldn't be able to spend her money. So Zhang Man chose to hold on to Zhou Shuan's thigh in recent years, just to get good grades and find a way to get a recommendation letter from the school. She couldn't understand why someone would look at America from the perspective of an enemy. Of course, although Zhang Man thought so in his heart, he would not be foolish enough to say it out loud. Even when Chang Haonan and Zhou Shuwan were talking, he would occasionally nod in agreement. In the past few years, she has completely controlled Zhou Shuwan. Chang Haonan may seem more difficult to deal with, but since it's already the second semester of her junior year, Zhang Man only needs to ensure that she can achieve good grades in this 10-credit aircraft design course. The decision to recommend graduate students and study abroad is made during the period between the end of junior year and the start of senior year. Therefore, the highest credit graduation project and several other courses in senior year are not important in terms of scores.